Hi, my name is Tyler Griffeth, and I am auditioning for the Hauntings finalist contest here for timpfest. The story that I am about to tell you is true. It actually happened to my cousin Blaine and I as we vacationed in San Diego, California in the summer of 2014. I remember, first of all, that night it was dark and quiet, too dark and quiet for a major city street in San Diego. But I told myself that it was late, about half past the witching hour, and one could expect a city street to be quiet or mostly empty as we walked back to our car from the waterfront. We had parked in a crumbling old parking garage. You see, San Diego is actually an old city as the western United States goes, as old. And I would guess that the black brick structure that we parked at, which, by the way, had the cheapest park per day price we could find, was at least 100 years old. And as we know, with history so often comes the ghosts of the past. So my cousin and I walked along silently, the sound of the footsteps on the concrete sidewalk loud in our ears. And I became aware as we neared this old parking garage that there were actually two other people on the street ahead of us. There, about 20 feet, there was a young man and a young woman walking arm in arm, perhaps in their late teens or early 20s, and wearing a little more formal dress than you might expect for nowadays. In the summertime as well, the man had slacks on, and a modest cut sundress was what the lady was wearing. They made it completely across the street in front of us, right in front of the parking garage, before we had even stepped into the crosswalk on the opposite side of the street. Well, my cousin and I had been kind of talking and distracted about a mishap earlier that day. And as we took our first step into that street, the woman on the other side of the street stopped abruptly and looked straight at us. It was such an abrupt movement from a stranger that it stopped my cousin and I in our tracks. At that exact moment, a speeding electric van blew through the light and crosswalk, passing inches from my cousin and I. And we looked at each other, both knowing immediately that if we had not stopped at that moment, that van would have plowed down both of us. We'd have been killed. We looked across the street back at the couple, and they had continued walking on back towards the parking garage. Well, we both ran, calling to them, trying to thank them, but they paid no attention and passed around the corner into the bank of elevators that serviced that old parking garage next to an exterior open flight of stairs on the exterior of the parking garage. About 15 feet in front of us is all. Well, both of us hurrying came around the corner to the small elevator lobby that was closed to the outside, only 3 or 4 seconds after we lost sight of them. Well, as we came around the corner, they weren't there. And my cousin instinctively, immediately jumped to catch the hold elevator button, as we figured naturally that they must have gone on in an open elevator, and we'd still have the chance to catch them before the elevator doors closed. Now, this is an old set of elevators, and the doors are slow, and it's not like it's an elevator in the hospital. The doors are slow to close and open, and the elevators themselves move slowly. Well, noticing that all the doors were closed, I also noticed that the level indicator showed level 4 and level 5 and level 5 for the other and level 4 behind me. And none of them were moving, except finally the one elevator that was on 4 that started coming down in response to my cousin having hit the call elevator button. Well, flabbergasted, I immediately ran out into the parking structure. Perhaps they went out there, and there was no way out of the elevator bank, and there was no way they could have gotten out except for in one of the elevators. And I looked out into the parking garage and knew that there was no one in sight anywhere in this huge garage, all of which I could see, as well as there were no nearby cars which this couple could have gotten into. My cousin came walking over to me at that point, beginning to be terrified, and asked me, "Where did that couple go?" Then I realized something. I walked back across the bare concrete of the parking garage and told my cousin, "Listen." And I took a few more steps. Almost loud were my footsteps on that bare concrete. And then I asked my cousin, "Did you hear anything that couple said? Or did you even hear their footsteps?" Well, both of us, looking at each other horrified, understood that we hadn't. And we stood there for a while in an empty San Diego parking garage, just not knowing what had happened to us there. Well, weeks later, and much affected by our experience with this vanishing couple, my cousin, who is a total skeptic about anything supernatural, sat alone in the basement of the Salt Lake County Library looking over old microfiche that had newspapers and articles that had anything to do with this couple, people who had had the same experience with perhaps the same thing in the vicinity, nearby streets. What he finally came across after finally hours of looking at that little screen was a news story from the summer of 1954. That story, which was exactly 60 years previous to our experience, told of how a young couple had been out for an evening stroll when a Chevy Bel Air had run the stop sign at exactly the same intersection that we had been at, and tragically killed instantly both of those youngsters who were at the time engaged to be married. There was a photo of both of the victims, and of course, the photo was of a young dark-haired man and a young dark-haired woman in a sundress, the very same woman who had stopped us and saved our lives and then had disappeared. That's all. Thank you.